Every day, I'd rush home, eager to check the front porch for the packages I had eagerly anticipated. As an online shopping enthusiast, my doorstep was a little slice of joy until it turned into a sad saga of theft. It started innocently enough. A few small items vanished, and I shrugged it off as coincidence. But soon, it became a pattern. My precious deliveries, books, gadgets, even a birthday gift for my best friend, disappeared without a trace. Each time, I felt a little more defeated. In my community, the HOA was supposed to be our guardian against such nuisances. I reached out to them, hopeful that they would take action. After all, we paid our dues for their services. Yet, my calls for help fell on deaf ears. The HOA's response was always the same, a polite but dismissive email about personal responsibility and community vigilance. They offered no solutions or support and seemed more interested in enforcing trivial rules about lawn decorations than addressing the pressing issue of package theft. As weeks turned into months, frustration turned into anger. I watched as my neighbors also became victims of this petty crime, yet the HOA remained eerily silent. Their indifference only fueled my resentment toward the so-called guardians of our community. It felt like a joke, an absurd reality where my packages were being snatched right under the noses of those entrusted to protect us. It was in this environment of helplessness that I began to hatch a plan. The HOA Karen, the self-appointed enforcer with an eye for minor infractions, had become the face of my frustration. Little did she know that her antics would soon inspire my most outrageous act of retribution. In the midst of my mounting frustration, one person stood out as the embodiment of everything wrong with the HOA, Karen, the self-appointed queen of community regulations. With her perfectly coiffed hair and a wardrobe that seemed to consist solely of pastel blazers and sensible shoes, she was always on patrol, armed with a clipboard and an insatiable urge to enforce even the most ridiculous rules. Karen had an uncanny ability to spot violations from a mile away. The moment a flag was hung a few inches too low or a lawn gnome was not positioned correctly, she was there, ready to issue a warning. Her obsession with order made her both feared and loathed in our neighborhood. It wasn't just her enforcement of the rules that irked me, it was her self-righteousness. She often boasted about her dedication to keeping our community pristine, while turning a blind eye to the very real problems we faced, like package theft. It became clear that Karen thrived on control. With her nose in everyone's business, she seemed to take pleasure in ensuring we all adhered to her version of community standards. Yet, when it came to the growing issue of stolen packages, her enthusiasm waned significantly. Instead of taking action against the thief plaguing our neighborhood, she chose to launch investigations into minor infractions like untrimmed hedges or neglected flower beds. I couldn't help but wonder if Karen was somehow involved in the thefts herself. After all, she had developed a knack for knowing when packages would arrive. She could often be spotted lurking nearby as deliveries were made. My frustration morphed into suspicion, and it was this very notion that sparked my wild plan for revenge. Karen's reign of overzealous rule enforcement had gone unchecked for far too long, and I was ready to take matters into my own hands. The final straw came on a sunny Thursday afternoon. I had been eagerly awaiting the delivery of a special package, an exclusive limited edition vinyl set from my favorite band. It was more than just music. It was a piece of nostalgia, a reminder of nights spent with friends, singing along to our favorite tunes. I had cleared my schedule. I was glued to the tracking information as the hours ticked by. As the day wore on, I finally spotted the delivery truck pull up in front of my house. My heart raced with anticipation. But when I stepped outside just minutes later, my excitement quickly turned to despair. There it was, an empty porch, devoid of any package. Panic set in as I frantically checked around the front yard and even asked my neighbors if they had seen anything. No one had. I rushed inside and pulled up the tracking information again, only to see that it had been marked as delivered. How could this be? I felt a wave of anger wash over me, not just at the thief, but at myself for being so naive to think that this time would be different. My mind raced back to Karen and her relentless enforcement of rules while remaining utterly unconcerned about our growing problem. In that moment of boiling frustration, something snapped inside me. This wasn't just another lost package. It was a symbol of everything wrong with our community's priorities. The HOA, under Karen's tyrannical watch, had failed us time and time again. I couldn't sit idly by any longer while she patrolled our neighborhood like a self-appointed guardian of trivialities. And so, with a mix of anger and determination, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If the HO wouldn't protect us from package thieves, perhaps it was time for a little creative revenge, one that would send a clear message to Karen and anyone else who thought they could get away with stealing from me. As I paced around my living room, my frustration morphed into a bizarre sense of creativity. I couldn't just let this injustice slide. I needed a plan that would not only reclaim my dignity but also serve a hefty dose of poetic justice to Karen. What could I do that would be memorable, outrageous, and, most importantly, harmless yet effective? That's when the idea struck me like a lightning bolt: a skunk. Yes, a skunk. The very notion made me chuckle as I imagined the chaos it could unleash. I envisioned Karen, the self-righteous enforcer of HOA rules, opening a package only to be greeted by the world's smelliest surprise. It was absurd, so absurd that it just might work. As I sat down to brainstorm the details, laughter bubbled up. How would I even get a skunk? Should I check local pet stores? Maybe even an exotic animal rescue? My mind raced with possibilities while I jotted down ideas on a notepad. Operation Stinky Retribution, as I dubbed it, would require careful planning. I pictured the perfect package, a beautifully wrapped box labeled HOA Karen, important documents inside. Oh, the irony. Inside, instead of important documents, would be a skunk nestled among some packing peanuts. It was both comical and utterly ridiculous. But what if it didn't go as planned? What if the skunk got spooked and sprayed everything in sight? Those concerns momentarily dampened my enthusiasm, but then I remembered how many times my packages had gone missing without any accountability from Karen or the HOA. A little chaos seemed like a fitting response to her reign of terror over our community. Perhaps this prank could even serve as a wake-up call for her and our neighbors about the real issues we faced. With my heart racing and laughter still echoing in my mind, I decided then and there I was going to make this outlandish plan come to life. It was time to show Karen that her overzealous enforcement wouldn't go unchallenged any longer. The next morning, fueled by caffeine and wild determination, I dove into my quest to find a skunk. My first stop? The internet, of course. A quick search revealed that skunks could be found through exotic pet dealers or wildlife rehabilitators. I immediately called the closest animal rescue center, my heart racing with anticipation. Hi, I'm looking for a skunk, I blurted out awkwardly. The voice on the other end chuckled before explaining that they typically didn't have skunks available for adoption. However, they recommended a quirky local exotic pet store that might have what I was looking for. With new hope, I hopped into my car and made my way to the store, which turned out to be a hidden gem filled with all kinds of unusual creatures. As I stepped inside, the owner, a bearded man with a tie-dye shirt, greeted me with a wide grin. "Welcome. Looking for something special?" he asked. Yeah, a skunk?" I replied sheepishly. He laughed heartily and led me to a back room where a pair of adorable skunks were waddling about in their enclosure. My heart melted at the sight of their tiny little faces, but reality hit me hard. How on earth was I going to transport one of these stinky little creatures without it causing chaos? Just then, a fellow customer, a woman in oversized sunglasses, overheard our conversation and chimed in. "You should definitely get one. They're so cute. Just make sure they're descented first," she declared enthusiastically. Descented? Was that even possible? My mind raced as visions of an untrained skunk spraying me in my car danced in my head. After discussing some options with the owner and taking copious notes on skunk care, I finally decided to adopt one of the little rascals. As I left the store with my new companion, a tiny creature named Stinky, I realized that acquiring the skunk was only the beginning of this wild adventure. My heart raced at the thought of what lay ahead. Setting up the prank without getting caught and ensuring that Karen got her long overdue lesson in community justice. With Stinky securely nestled in a makeshift carrier, I returned home, heart pounding with excitement and a hint of trepidation. The time had come to set my plan into motion. First things first, I needed to craft the perfect fake package that would lure Karen into my trap. I rummaged through my basement and found an old cardboard box, just the right size. I carefully wrapped it in bright, shiny paper labeled "Important" HOA documentation. I even added some fake official-looking stamps and a return address that made it sound like it came from the HOA itself. It was a masterpiece of deception, and I couldn't help but chuckle as I admired my handiwork. Next, I had to figure out how to introduce Stinky into this carefully laid trap. I set up a cozy little area inside the box with some soft bedding and a few treats to keep him comfortable. As I gently placed Stinky inside, he looked up at me with wide eyes, blissfully unaware of the chaos he was about to unleash. With the package ready, it was time to devise the perfect placement strategy. I knew the best way to catch Karen's attention was to leave it right by my front porch on delivery day, when she'd be most likely to check for new arrivals. But I also needed a way to monitor the situation without being seen, so I decided to set up a small camera hidden among the potted plants nearby. The tension built as I prepared for the reveal. Would Karen fall for my clever ruse? Would she open the package? I envisioned the moment she lifted the lid and came face to face with Stinky's bewildered expression. My heart raced at the thought of her reaction, both comedic and satisfying. As evening approached, I took a deep breath, double-checking everything once more. The stage was set for what would surely be an unforgettable showdown between HOA justice and my own brand of whimsical revenge. All that was left now was to wait for delivery day and hope that Stinky would be ready for his moment in the spotlight. The day had finally arrived, and my heart raced with a mix of exhilaration and dread as I watched from my hiding spot behind the potted plants. The sun was shining, and it felt like the perfect stage was set for my grand reveal. Just after noon, I saw Karen strutting down the street, her eyes scanning for anything that might violate her precious community rules. When she spotted the package on my porch, her expression shifted from casual indifference to intense curiosity. I leaned in, barely able to contain my excitement as she approached it with her signature air of superiority. What's this? She muttered to herself, glancing around as if she were about to unveil some hidden treasure. With a decisive move, she knelt down, lifted the box, and began tearing away the decorative wrapping. My breath caught in my throat as I prepared for the explosion of chaos that was about to unfold. As soon as she opened the box, Stinky darted out like a tiny cannonball, his fur fluffed up and ready to explore his surroundings. The sight of this little skunk zooming into the open air was nothing short of hilarious. Karen gasped, her eyes wide as saucers, and for a split second, time seemed to freeze. "What in the world?" she stammered, stumbling back in shock. Stinky paused mid-stride, his nose twitching as he took in the unfamiliar scents around him. The other neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Laughter erupted from one side of the street when they realized what was happening. Karen shrieked as Stinky turned toward her, momentarily frozen in place. "Get away from me," she yelled, frantically waving her arms as if trying to ward off an invisible monster. The absurdity of the situation struck me hard. Here was the self-proclaimed enforcer of community decorum fleeing from a harmless skunk. As laughter rippled through the crowd, I couldn't help but join in. The sheer ridiculousness of it all, the HOA Karen being outsmarted by a tiny creature, was too much to bear. It felt like justice served on a platter of humor, and for once, I relished every moment of it. As the laughter faded and Stinky scampered off into the bushes, the reality of what I had done began to set in. The initial thrill of seeing Karen's reaction was quickly overshadowed by a wave of concern about the aftermath of my prank. The neighborhood buzzed with excitement and disbelief. Some neighbors found the whole situation hilarious, while others seemed uncertain about how to react. Did she really deserve it? Some whispered among themselves, casting glances at me as I stood there, half excited and half nervous. I could feel their eyes on me, some filled with admiration, others with judgment. Soon enough, word spread like wildfire. The HOA held an emergency meeting to address the unfortunate incident. I couldn't help but chuckle as I imagined Karen passionately recounting her harrowing experience with Stinky. Would they blame me? Would there be repercussions for my moment of comedic genius? The thought of facing a board that seemed more concerned about lawn gnomes than actual issues made my stomach churn. While most neighbors chuckled at the absurdity of it all, I felt a twinge of guilt creeping in. Had I gone too far? Sure, Karen was overzealous and irritating. But did she really warrant a skunk-induced panic? I considered the possibility that this prank might push her further into her role as the neighborhood enforcer, perhaps even leading to more rules and regulations targeting the fun-loving spirit of our community. The next day, I received an email from the HOA, an official warning about disruptive behavior and community standards. It was clear they were trying to maintain control in the wake of my prank. Mixed feelings swirled inside me. On one hand, I felt victorious for standing up against Karen's antics, but on the other hand, I worried that my actions might have backfired. As I reflected on what had happened, I realized that humor could be a powerful tool for change, but it also came with consequences. Would this incident spark a shift in how we engage with one another in our community? Only time would tell. As the dust settled from the chaotic skunk incident, I found myself deep in thought, reflecting on the lengths I had gone to for a sense of justice. What had started as a light-hearted act of revenge had morphed into something much larger, a community spectacle that forced everyone to confront the absurdity of our HOA dynamics. I realized that my prank, while undeniably hilarious, was also a reflection of my own frustrations and grievances with an organization that seemed more focused on enforcing rules than supporting its residents. In my quest to reclaim my dignity, I had inadvertently highlighted the need for open dialogue within our community. Was there a better way to address our concerns than through stunts like mine? The laughter echoed in my mind as I thought about Karen. While she remained a figure of annoyance, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of empathy for her. Perhaps she felt just as trapped in her role as I did within the confines of HOA regulations. In trying to enforce order, she had lost touch with the community's spirit and its real issues. In the weeks following the prank, I noticed subtle changes around the neighborhood. People began to engage more with one another, discussing their grievances openly rather than letting them fester. Some neighbors even approached Karen directly to talk about community concerns, which led to surprising discussions about how we could improve our living environment together. While my skunk plan may have seemed outlandish, it sparked conversations that were long overdue. I learned that humor could be an effective way to provoke thought and inspire change when employed thoughtfully. Ultimately, my perspective on conflict resolution evolved. I understood that while pranks could provide temporary satisfaction, true change required collaboration and communication. Perhaps next time, instead of a skunk, I could host a neighborhood meeting complete with snacks to foster understanding and connection among us all. It was time to turn over a new leaf, one that embraced both fun and constructive dialogue in our little corner of the world. As I reflected on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded, I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Who would have thought that a little skunk could serve as a catalyst for change in our sleepy neighborhood? It became clear to me that petty grievances, no matter how trivial, can have a way of escalating into something far more significant when left unaddressed. In community living, we often find ourselves navigating a maze of personalities, quirks, and rules. It's easy to get lost in the minutiae, like grass that's an inch too tall or a mailbox that's slightly askew. But what I learned through my outrageous prank was that humor can be a powerful tool for bringing people together. Sometimes, it takes an unexpected stunt to remind us that we're all human and that our shared frustrations can pave the way for genuine connections. My skunk escapade served as a reminder that in facing conflict, we have choices. We can let annoyance fester until we're driven to ridiculous acts of revenge, or we can approach our frustrations with creativity and laughter. Sure, my method may not have been conventional, but it opened up conversations that had been long overdue. So here's the takeaway. The next time you find yourself grumbling about your neighbor's overgrown hedges or an HOA rule that seems completely ludicrous, consider this. Perhaps it's time to talk it out. Maybe over coffee instead of using stinky surprises. After all, community living doesn't have to be a series of battles. It can be an opportunity for camaraderie and understanding. In the end, whether you choose to embrace humor or diplomacy, or even a little bit of both, remember that sometimes the most unexpected solutions can lead to the most meaningful changes. Who knew a skunk could teach us such valuable lessons about life and living together? Life is too short not to laugh while navigating its quirks.